All right, it's Friday, and that means it's time to talk business with Amanda Lang. Good afternoon, Amanda.
Hi, Sue.
Amanda is CTV News' chief financial correspondent, and she joins us every Friday. And I guess we have to start with Gordie Howe Bridge. What is happening with that? So today we got a little bit of clarity. It seems a lot of it is about tolls.
Yeah, it's interesting. The bridge was supposed to be opened, and then the opening was delayed, and it appeared as though there was some negotiating going on. Really the U.S. was demanding kind of a piece of the tolls. Mm. It looks as though Canada has a pretty good deal. So when the bridge opens on July 27th, the revenue that the tolls generate will go to repay the cost of building the bridge, which Canada undertook, and the cost of servicing the debt, according to the Prime Minister. After those two things have happened, the toll revenue will be split 50-50. So it's a pretty good deal for Canada. There might be a little bit of face saving in this. I don't know whether there's any other component to this that got the bridge reopened, whether we had to do anything, offer anything else somewhere else. It's possible. But this deal is a good one.
Okay, but as far as my understanding was that before this deal was announced, Canada was going to recoup all the profit from the tolls. So it is a bit of a climb down, or do we know that for sure?
I think there was always an idea that at some point we would share the revenue. Because we built the bridge, and it cost billions of dollars to do that. There was always a sense that we should recoup our costs first, the cost to build it, but that after that there would be some kind of sharing of toll revenue, which makes sense, right? Because the traffic comes both ways. Yeah. However, I don't know whether the debt servicing was always included or not, but that is a pretty useful inclusion because that's an ongoing cost related to the building of the bridge. So whatever the original deal was, this one makes a lot of sense. It's not bad for Canada, and getting the bridge open obviously was a kind of a primary goal here.
So, and I guess that's going to happen, although the government seems to be still pretty cagey about releasing the deal, and I guess there are still some things to work out, like it's not a done deal, as they say.
Yeah. Again, like we are dealing with tough negotiations, and there might be pieces to this that are maybe less palatable. You know, we might have had to do a one-time payment of some kind. You just don't know with these guys, to be honest, because they negotiate based on their own variables. So ultimately,
that's so diplomatic, Amanda.
I know.
You should be
I'm being a little careful. I'm being a little careful. But ultimately, I assume we will see a contract of some kind once it's all signed. This isn't the kind of thing you necessarily keep secret, but right. I think we know the basic terms so far.
Okay. So I won't get into the rumor territory with you then. Let's talk about something much more concrete, which is the Bank of Canada, which on Wednesday said it would be holding its policy rate at 2.2%. What do you think about that?
So unsurprising in the sense that they're definitely kind of waiting and seeing. And one of the things they've been watching for is whether the higher energy prices, because of the war in Iran, would work their way into the economy. And we have all hoped that that conflict would abate and therefore energy prices would normalize back down. And just last week, we got a real signal that that's what's going to happen if we can get this war out of the way, because we saw oil prices back to pre-Iran war levels last week. So to me, that was a bit of a comfort to the Bank of Canada that we will see normalization. They've focused in on food prices, quite rightly, because we haven't seen grocery prices come down. We haven't seen food inflation really normalize since the big spikes post-pandemic. And this conflict is going to exacerbate that, especially because it's feeding into fertilizer costs, and that will have a long-term effect on food prices.
And of course, this ongoing conflict in the Strait of Hormuz has a big relationship on food prices as well, because food needs to be transported. And on that, so the U.S. military on Wednesday reimposed a blockade on Iranian ports over Tehran's attack on ships trying to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. So all that to say, it looks like the Strait of Hormuz is once again impassable. So what does this mean?
Unfortunately, it means that the damage to our economies, the risk of damage goes up. Because there's a lot of things that people had been kind of doing workarounds on, hoping this would end. The longer it goes on, the harder those become. And as you know, something like 20% of the world's tanker traffic passes through the Strait of Hormuz. There's permanent damage to some infrastructure, and there are some things that only come from that part of the world. So the components of some manufacturing processes, the components of some fertilizers, and so the consequences of this continuing are very bad. I mean, you could see a global recession. The risk that this turns into a widespread problem is very high. back to the Bank of Canada, if you read the tea leaves and what they're saying, they're pretty optimistic about the back half of this year. So there's a built-in assumption there that this conflict comes to some resolution, and I'm pretty happy to see that.
Yeah, kind of surprised also since it's so volatile over there. But yeah, okay, well, we watch this space, and in the meantime, of course, gas prices are going to stay high all summer, just as here in Quebec, everybody's about to head off for their summer holiday. So
yeah, unfortunately, this is the reality, right? We might get a little bit of a break here and there if you see, the sort of volatility down based on what's happening. There's also the political aspect to this, which is, if you want to be cynical, the president might want to have this resolved in time for the midterms, but that doesn't help the summer travel and the pain at the pumps that might persist for the next month or two.
All right, well, watch this space. Let's talk about giant corporations, which now the biggest in the world seems to be Apple.
Yeah, interesting to see the market value of Apple versus NVIDIA. NVIDIA, of course, is the chip designer for the chips that are fueling AI and some pretty important other parts of kind of the leading edge of technology, including sort of graphic interfaces. NVIDIA had been the most valuable. It sold off a little bit. And what I would say, to me, the relevance of this story for most people is there's a bit of a pullback in optimism around AI. And we do see this, right? When there's a new technology, everyone gets super excited. Everybody invests in it and thinks the build out will go on forever. And at some point, there's a reality check of, how many data centers do we need and how are we fueling this and what is the actual real market for this stuff today? And we might be getting a bit of that reckoning. The best case scenario is that reckoning happens slowly and in an orderly fashion and doesn't tank the whole market. But I'm, here to remind you that isn't typically what happens. Typically, there's a big pullback at some point to get the valuations back down to earth.
And we've seen a little bit of that, right? That little bit of volatility in the chip market, which also seems to be related to AI.
100%. Yeah, we've started to see sort of some of the real overvaluation come out. And again, if it can happen in an orderly fashion, that's the best case scenario.
Yes.
The worst case scenario is when it happens in a rush and people, head for the exits, and you get kind of a spring 2000 tech-like correction in the markets. Overall, the market is still pretty highly valued. There's lots of companies that aren't overvalued, but those kind of leading-edge AI companies are still pretty expensive, even with a bit of a pullback here.
Yeah, and it's interesting because there's been pushback, I know, in places like New York that don't want the data centers, and here in Canada, it's controversial as to whether or not we should be building them. I know there's a huge one slated for in Alberta, but so yeah, a lot of unknowns for sure. Okay,
and there is
go ahead.
There is a period in a build out where you overbuild those kinds of things, so it's actually it's wise to sort of move slowly on it.
If only the markets could listen to you, Amanda.
Yeah.
Thanks as ever.
Thanks, Sue.
Okay, bye.
Hello, Canada.
This is Bryan Adams Radio, hosted by Bryan Adams himself.
We'll play a few of mine, a ton of my favorites, and some must-hear behind-the-scenes stories from the world of rock and roll. One thing about doing rock and roll so long is you end up meeting a lot of the people that you admire. Sometimes you even get to work with them.
It's only love, and that's all. Bryan Adams Radio. Now available on the free iHeartRadio app.
Everybody